It's really nice to see you all. Good evening and welcome. So the first thing I'd like to do is acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. So we're on Gadigal land, recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and also like to pay our respects to their elders past and present. Tonight, our topic is the Kalivi sustainability story. It is an incredible and inspiring one, and we're going to hear from Robin and Mick in just a minute. But just in terms of the format of the evening, we're going to first hear from Robin and Mick about how they transformed Kalivi Castle in Ireland. Then we'll ask them some questions and also open it up for any other questions from the group. And then after that, we're going to discuss some of their sustainability work through their business, which is called Abergeldy Complex Infrastructure. It's the largest locally owned civil construction contractors in Australia. And we'll also cover some of their giving and their approach to that as well. And we can also, if you've got any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. So I'm delighted to, we often see Robin and Mick on the call, but I'm delighted particularly tonight to welcome Robin Craig and Mick Boyle. Robin and Mick live in Sydney, and in 2013 they purchased a 365-acre property in Kalivi, South Armagh in Northern Ireland. This is near where Mick's parents were born and from where he emigrated to Australia with his parents in 1968. They've restored the farm and the historic buildings, and it is now an award-winning hotel. Sustainability was the focus of the hotel design, and as well as the build and operation. It continues to be as they look at transforming the forest around the hotel. So over to you, Robin and Mick, to share this amazing and really inspiring story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen and Carolyn. Thanks so much for giving us this opportunity to share our story. And we're coming to you from Wongal land here in Sydney. It is a story about sort of transformation, sustainability, and also mild insanity, because
I'm supposed to say impact investing.
Yeah, it also was a form of investing on several levels. We've made a bit of a presentation, so I'll just maybe share our screen so you can sort of get a bit of a feel for what we've undertaken, and I really hope that this works. So it's the one. How's that? Can you see that? Okay. So there we go. This is a photograph of Kalivi in South Armagh, so County Armagh, which is just over the border into the north of Ireland when you're coming up from the south. This is a very peaceful looking picture, but when I first visited South Armagh back in 1989, this was a militarised zone. It was an IRA stronghold, and there were British soldiers in the fields and helicopters flying overhead. Our property is on the side of that mountain. That mountain was used as a landing point for the helicopters during the Troubles. Mick's family are from that area, as Carolyn has already said, and so it was a bit of a shock for me when I first went there with Mick 30 years ago, before we were even married. I thought it was a beautiful area, but as a girl from Australia, it was a bit of an eye-opener to what was going on there in the north. But I did fall in love with the community of South Armagh, and they always said to me at that time, so how long are you home for? And I had to explain, well, no, I'm from Melbourne. I'm only here for 2 weeks. And they were like, oh, yeah, okay. But how long are you home for? And after about a week or so of people asking me that question, I just said, 2 weeks. And so it sort of established it as my second home. So we've been coming and going from the area for 30 odd years. But as Carolyn said, back in 2013, this property came up for sale at Kalivi.
And in that photograph, there's houses of about 50 of my first cousins. So there's a big connection to the area.
I suppose Mick always felt like he wanted to have a part of Kalivi to call his own. And so this property came up for sale and we bought it in 2013. Okay, to give you an idea of where it is, it's you can see that it's about an hour north of Dublin and an hour south of Belfast. I don't want to make this into a publicity stunt, but I'm going to then now play a video of what it looks like today, just so you can get a feel for what it's like. And I hope this works as well.
Good work.
Is that still working?
That's a walled garden. It's view from the mountain. That's the old coach house, and that's the hotel rooms, what they look like. And that's the chef gathering the food at the restaurant. And that's the fine dining, and a bit of a wedding venue. And these are the woods.
We've got a farm store where we sell our own produce. Spa. So that's what it looks like today. I'll give you, I think it's probably better I go now to this slide here, which shows you what it looked like when we first bought it. So that was the castle. It's there was never a king or queen that lived in this castle. It was owned by a local farmer, and back in the 1830s, he renovated it and put turrets on his own house to make it look like a castle. It's actually not particularly big. It's
Thank goodness.
It's got 4 bedrooms upstairs, so but it really was just a family house that looked like a castle. That's sort of the showcase piece of the property. This was the coach house, which was down the hill, and that's now the reception of the hotel. If you can see there in front of the hotel of the castle, that was a mill building. It was a corn mill back again in the 1800s. Yeah, that's just another view of what the property looked like when we bought it. And that's sort of what it looks like today. That's actually really shortly after we finished the renovation. It looks a bit stark probably in that photo, but it does sink down into the hillside. And that's the castle restored. Oh, sorry, I'll go back, because one of the reasons Carolyn asked us to, and Stephen asked us to talk today, was a little bit about the sustainability and the transformation of the buildings themselves. So what we did was we decided, well, for one thing, when we bought the property, we didn't know what we were going to do with it. We quickly made a decision to turn it into a hospitality venue. Not that we'd ever actually worked in hospitality ourselves. We run a civil infrastructure business here in Australia, but we just knew that it lended itself to that sort of business. So we also knew that it was a bit of a strange idea because, as I've already mentioned, South Armagh was a militarised zone during the Troubles. They still really had quite the people still had a strong feeling about South Armagh, thought of it as a troubled zone. Even, we're talking when we bought it 20 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, people would still not go to South Armagh because they thought it was bandit country. So here we were thinking, well, we'll build a 4-star hotel in an area that no one would have ever considered to travel to as a tourist destination. But we could see how beautiful the area was. And also because people hadn't travelled there, it's sort of like a new tourism area for Ireland itself. And we really wanted to change the way people thought about South Armagh and really engage with the local community. So when we're talking about transformation, we did transform the buildings and the farmland, but we sort of also wanted to just really involve the local community in that transformation. And I think it actually has really made a difference. So we engaged local architects. We also brought together companies that wouldn't have worked together necessarily. So we found a really good heritage surveyor who was a Protestant who wouldn't have ever worked with the Catholic architects that we wanted to do the job. We brought them together into a team, and they are still working together, currently, which is terrific. We also got most of the building materials that we used for the property were from the local area. We were incredibly lucky in the Newry Basin, you would call it. We got all our mattresses, all our soft furnishing, all of our sort of subbies, the electricians, the plumbers, all of those people were all from the region. And the architect, who was from Newry, which is the closest town, took into consideration the whole landscape and designed a modern hotel building with the mindset of using nature as the showpiece, and with the big windows allowing plenty of light in and also heat during the winter to make sure that the building itself was very sustainable. We used all the usual things like LED lighting, insulation, and we have our own on-site sewage treatment plant. So we manage our own sort of sewer offsets. All of our waste that goes to the cardboard's all recycled, the glass is all recycled, that type of thing. And we definitely try to minimize any plastic waste. Funny things like we just said, okay, well, we don't want any takeaway coffee cups to be used, because actually one of the things when we got the land was it was absolutely full of rubbish. We took away so much rubbish because the community had been using this land as really a park. It had become very derelict, and it was quite lovely. Actually, that was one of the reasons we wanted to make it a hospitality venue, was to make sure that the community could still come in and use it. But over the years, groups of people had come and had parties there and left a lot of rubbish and in the waterways and all over the place. So we just didn't want people to come and get a coffee and throw it in the river or anything when they were there. So we just said, if you're going to come, you come and you sit and you have your coffee, and you don't have a plastic cup. And we also, in the hotel rooms, we didn't want any of the little plastic shampoos and conditioners. We wanted just sort of pump packs, which sounds really obvious, but at the time when we were doing it, it was a 4-star hotel, and we employed a general manager to advise us on the hospitality aspects of it. And he said, you can't do that for a 4-star hotel. No one's going to accept it. It's going to look too cheap and nasty. And I said, well, we're just going to do it, because it's just too much plastic if you're giving away these little bottles. And so we did it. And now pretty much wherever you go, that's what hotels have. 4 and 5-star hotels have those pump packs. So, well, that's a good thing for the industry. So that was the sustainability journey, I suppose, for the building of it. And then we also as you saw from the video, we were really interested in using the produce from the land in our restaurant. So we've got a fine dining restaurant and we've got our wall garden, and we also have our own cattle and sheep, which are used, they're used for meals. And
their own butcher on site.
We recently got our own butcher. So, and we sell our own produce in the farm store. So again, just, making things very local and all seasonal for the visitors.
Very few food miles at our place. It all comes from the estate as much as possible. And that was like, apart from the buildings, which were a big restoration process, the site, as you said, is 365 acres. About 150 of that was farmland, and around 200 is woodlands or upland heath. So it was the farmland was just as derelict as the buildings were. So in parallel to the restoration of the buildings, we restored the farmland and to be able to use it for produce in the hotel.
So I'll just flick through these next couple of slides, but this was just a very happy moment when we had the actual opening of the hotel. That's Mick's mum and dad, who came back to South Armagh from Australia and cut the ribbon. So we were delighted by that. And then we had two really big parties. That's Mick's mum's side of the family, and that's Mick's dad's side of the family. So you can sort of see the sort of community that we personally have in the area. Already talked about that. So that's just our gardener and our farmer and our chef, who all work together. The other thing we really thought would be worth talking about is, in addition to building the hotel, probably what has been our main passion throughout this whole thing is our love of the woodlands. And it might be a bit hard to see in this photo, but at the back there you can see that there's all pine plantations, and actually in front of those pine plantations there is sort of bare land, because that was recently harvested pine. We own the land that goes right up to the top of the mountain, I should say, and it was leased to the Forestry Service of Northern Ireland on a 150-year lease, where we were paid £40.40 a year for them to use the land for timber plantation. And we've been talking to them pretty much since we bought the property to see if we could get that lease surrendered and we could plant a native woodland instead of plantation timber. And we've been talking to them, and we spoke to ecologists and the local community, and got a lot of support behind that idea. And eventually, about 2 years ago, they came around to our way of thinking. And so this was a very happy day for us as well, which is the day that's the head of the Forestry Service Northern Ireland, and signing the surrender of the 150-year lease, which still had 80 years to run. And what that's allowed us to do, this is another happy occasion, with planting the first of what would be 50,000 trees on the property. That's Mick's mum and dad again that came back. So it just has freed us up to be able to use the site to plant deciduous trees and native trees, and link into a forest park, which is our neighbour, to create what's going to be about a 200-acre wildlife corridor. And Northern Ireland has the smallest percentage of woodlands in the whole of Europe. So for Northern Ireland, it's going to be a significant woodland. That's just to give you an idea of Mick's. This is actually Mick's plan that he's put together. So that was a year ago, was the surrendering of the lease. And this is just a bit of a map outlining what we're going to do in terms of the woodland restoration. It probably doesn't make any sense to anyone, but just to give you an idea that it's all very well planned. It's all got forestry approval. and we're working with some very high-level ecologists from Northern Ireland who are helping us do that in a proper manner.
Yeah, so that's the whole estate in the 365 acres. So we've pretty much worked through the lower areas. It's the upper areas which are sort of in the triangle that we're working on now. And like as we explained it when we launched this plan about 6 weeks ago when we were over there, we're sort of 10 years into a 20-year restoration program. We've got the farm, 2/3 of it restored. We've got the buildings restored, and now the forestry is being restored. So that area 4 is a pine plantation, so it's being removed at the moment. And in February, that 10 hectares, about 20,000 trees of native woodland will be planted. And then the following year, what you see is area 5 will be planted in native woodland, and then about another 10 years, area 6. So we've worked our way through so that, you know, in 10 years, it'll be 50,000 trees planted, although a lot of them will happen in more than half of them will happen in the next 2 or 3 years.
We've been really lucky to build up a strong partnership with a charity over in Northern Ireland called the Woodland Trust, and they're helping us with the planting process. There we go. Oh, so part of the plan is also to do things like with our hedgerows, plant layered hedgerows with different plant species to make them a bit more biodiverse, but also you can use them for food for the garden, for the restaurant. So we're going to fence those off and put different tree varieties in the hedgerows.
Reduce the size of some of our paddocks by adding in a few extra hedgerows.
This is just sort of standard stuff you might see in Australia as well, sort of protecting field or paddock trees around this that'll be dotted around to for shelter for the livestock. We've actually had our own cattle on site for probably 5 years, I think. So these are longhorn cattle, and the advantage of having them is that they can stay outdoors all year round. Most cattle in the UK have to be put into a shed for the winter, and that creates all sorts of issues in terms of effluent flowing out and then has to be sprayed on various farms and things like that. So our cattle can just live in the woodlands that are on the site, and they also are very good at trampling down bracken that has built up so that we don't have to use chemicals for that. Then we've also got Cheviot sheep, which are also very hardy type of sheep that don't require that much shelter and are just very used to those wilder conditions that we experience over there. This is just to give you an idea of what the upper areas of the property look like. So this is part of the area that was leased to the Forestry Service. You can see that the pine trees are there down the bottom of the shot. The next section was a plantation which was unsuccessful and
too high.
So we're going to remove that. And then you've got this lovely flow of heather then that goes right up to the top of the mountain. So again, a great opportunity to sequester carbon, because heather and heathlands really do a lot of sequestration. And you can see by that line, there's a fence that created that line of heather, where we're going to remove that fence and it'll come back to its natural positioning on the side of the mountain. This is just a bit of a vision as to what the woodland is going to look like in 2040, if any of us are around.
Well, I hope so.
So, yeah, that's the end of it. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Robin and Mick. That's amazing. 50,000 trees as well. That's I mean, just on that, I mean, how do you get all those planted? Have you got like an army of people sort of planting those, or?
Well, for this year, there's 10 hectares. There'll be quite an army of volunteers
Yeah.
that the Woodland Trust is helping us get. And then next year as well, it'll be similar. But after that, we've got 2 bulk plantings. During the next year, we're going to establish a nursery on site and have a forester propagate trees, and then progressively increase over the next 10 years more on the edges after a couple of bulk plantings.
Yeah.
Because apart from planting trees, there's actually quite a bit of work in weeding within the native. So we'll get a bit of bulk work over the next couple of years, but then probably the next 10 years is all the hard work to set it up to really thrive.
Yeah.
And we've got a couple of patches where the regenerating native woodland is infested with rhododendron and fuchsia, and the some of the Sitka spruce pine trees have propagated in adjacent areas. So we're just going to have to keep removing those for a couple of years till we end up with a more native woodland.
Yeah, yeah. And you were saying the other day when we were chatting, Robin, that you're sort of maybe thinking about trialing. You were talking about maybe burning some of the areas or something like that because of the way that the pine was falling and things.
Yeah. So I suppose you could see from that plan that Mick put together, the restoration plan, there's different sections, and there's one section that has the pine trees on it, that they're mature pines that have been there for about 40 or 50 years, I suppose. They're ready for harvest. But so under them is really just pine needles. There's nothing that grows under that. That's why it's not very good for biodiversity, because you've got that single species. It's an American tree. And I just went to a seminar recently in Tasmania, and someone there was talking about how they had restored a pine plantation in Tasmania by burning the stumps of the pines once they had harvested them, and then seeing what came up. And like 30 species or something of native trees came up after the burning. So since then, I've been researching to see whether that could possibly happen with oaks and alder and ash in our area. And I did find one research paper on it, so I'm going to talk to the ecologist when I go back there next time and see whether we might be able to do just a portion of that area with a fire burn and see if something just regenerates, even though it's really been almost like a desert underneath those pines for so many years. And I see that someone's asked a question about the native seed bank.
Yeah, I was going to. Yeah.
So there was an area on the mountain that had a different type of pine called larch, which was slightly deciduous pine, and that was cleared about 5 years ago. And this is actually one of the reasons we really wanted to push the Forestry Service to get the land back, because where the larch was, they had actually replanted it with Sitka spruce, which is that American tree, which doesn't allow any undergrowth. It destroys any undergrowth. And those little Sitka spruces were sort of getting up to about sort of 1 to 2 meters high. But what you could see was, even in the 5 years since the larch had been cut down, was the regeneration of some native species coming through, which is very exciting. So we are going to replant that with some trees to help it along, but we can already see that there's undergrowth there that's just coming through of its own accord. So yeah.
Yeah, and we'll jump to a few questions here. So Linda's an interesting one. It's great to see the family engagement. So obviously your parents are very involved there, Mick, which was which is fantastic.
Well, they're more involved in giving advice. Did plant one tree.
And what about the local community in terms of what are they made of this whole project, and was there any resistance to what you're doing?
Initially, there was probably a bit more suspicion, but I think having a local connection was a big help, and a lot of things have in that part of Ireland, or in probably a few parts of Northern Ireland in particular, a lot of things got started but didn't actually get finished. So I think once it got finished and opened, and people could see what we were trying to do, I think that they've generally been pretty good supporters. You know, I think, you know, and as Robin said, you know, a lot of the people have, of the local people have supplied, or, you know, we buy all the produce local that we can't produce ourselves, and even in the construction, they're all local people. So they all feel very proud of what we've created together. And
even now, there's 150 employees in the hotel now, which sounds like a lot, but a lot of them are just part-timers, and they would be like students from the local area who come in and serve in the restaurants and at the, you know, weddings and things like that. So it's a great source of employment for the local community, and a starting point for, you know, people getting their first job and things. So it just, that creates a lot of support as well.
I see Matt's put a question in the chat, and actually when you were talking about the weeding that would be needed initially, Matt, I thought about you because I know you've done a lot of bush care and a lot of weeding in the Kangaroo Valley. But Matt's question is, are there any escaped Aussie plants that are weeds?
I haven't seen any yet. A few people have suggested to us, oh, maybe, you know, you should plant a wattle as an Australian tree, a hark to Australia, and I've just said absolutely not. They just, you know, they just take over. We can't be doing that. So no, I haven't. But there's definitely rhododendron and fuchsia, like Mick said, that they look nice when they flower, but
there is a few things that you think of as weeds, but they're not actually weeds there.
Yes, that's what Matt.
So you have to be careful.
You would have trouble, Matt, because we see thistles and
privet. It's escaped hedgerows that are
privet, exactly. Yeah, and it's fine there.
Megan's got a question. Apart from guests, is there any public access to the property in Woodland?
Yes, so what we did was very early on, we did an agreement with the local council to have a public walkway on the property. So it goes up the driveway and then up the sort of side of the river and up and around to the forest park. So it's quite a nice little circuit that the local community are very welcome to use, and they do use a lot. And then we do get definitely the locals just come strolling on through everywhere, through the wall garden and everything like that. But
we generally discourage it throughout the estate, other than hotel guests, because we have to. It's a working farm as well, so we're trying to manage animals. So you just and the woodlands. So it's easier if the numbers aren't huge.
That makes sense. I was actually going to ask you about the carbon neutral plans that you've got. I think, did you say it's 2024 that you're hoping to get to?
Yeah. So actually, I didn't mention that. When we first built it, we had hoped to put in solar panels and hydro, but to be honest, we sort of just ran out of money to do it. But we've committed to doing that in the next 6 months. So that'll make a big difference to our carbon footprint in terms of the energy usage by the hotel. And then with the planting of the trees, we're also going to be sequestering quite a bit of carbon with that initiative. And so we've got someone doing a full sustainability audit of the property at the moment to try and make sure that we've got it documented as to what our carbon footprint is.
My calculations are that when we put the solar panels in, we'll save 45 tonnes per annum of carbon, and when we plant the trees, we should be carbon neutral without offsetting. So just within the estate, even with we may have to reduce our herd of cattle or sheep a little bit, but what we'll do is, what I'm trying to introduce, the thinking that when people are looking to do anything on the estate, that we work out the carbon cost as well as the cost, and make sure that we find a way to remain carbon neutral within the estate. But we haven't, as Robin said, when we were there 6 weeks ago, we engaged a consultant to establish and monitor annually our carbon footprint.
And we actually also, I said I was in Tassie. We went to visit a startup business called Sea Forest. I don't know if anyone's heard of this organisation, that they're using seaweed to as a additive to cattle feed to try and reduce the methane output. And so we would definitely be looking at that for our cattle. The latest iteration of that seems to be to get the active ingredient from the seaweed and mix it with oil and then put it in a salt lick for the cattle, because it's a bit trickier if you've got just cattle that are in the fields to actually get that active ingredient into their gut. So watch this space.
Well, that will be really interesting to hear how you go. And I think people on the call would also be, I imagine, interested that you're putting solar panels on it, because I suppose the perception is that maybe solar doesn't work. In Australia, there's an abundance of sunlight, but would it work somewhere where where there's not as much sun?
Yes, it's quite interesting. Very effective in the summertime. Sort of a quite and you're trying to balance then, because you've got such long days, and but also doesn't contribute very much in the wintertime. So
makes sense.
The next iteration is, we'll probably, because we've got across the property a 400-meter difference in elevation from top to bottom. We'll probably introduce a hydro scheme which will run pretty well in the wintertime, but doesn't run as well in the summertime. So that's going to be our balancing act. But as Robin said, we'll put the solar in first, and then the hydro will take a little bit longer to get approvals for. But I'm sure we will. But we'll need to build a dam high up in the mountain, and a reservoir, and then drop it over 200 meters, and I think we'll have a pretty good system. And I'm hoping that I can actually use it as a bit of a pumped hydro system, so that I can actually then use it in the summertime with a smaller amount of water to pump back up in the daytime, and using the solar power. So a little bit of technology game to play, but it does seem on the first investigations that it should be what we look. It's going to be what we need to do. When we built the hotel, we for environmental and cost reasons, we didn't put air conditioning in the hotel rooms because it's islanded. We put plenty of heating in, but you know, even Ireland is experiencing global warming, so in the summertime we're going to need air conditioning, and that's probably I need to figure out how I can work out what the carbon impact of that is, and then work a way to offset it with what we do on site. So I'm thinking the pumped hydro will be the solution to that. So we're just working through that at the moment, but that's probably another year or 18 months away before we can do it.
Yeah, interesting. You're talking there about global warming, and just before we started this, you were talking about, was it a tropical storm and flooding in Ireland? And Richard's asked a question here: creating woodland is a long-term project. What would be your succession plan, and is global warming an issue for what native species you plant?
Look, I think there's a fair bit of work now. As far as I know, the species should be okay, but the weather is changing.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So, you know, I think what we all do to try and reduce that impact will help. But and we did, like 2 weeks ago, there was a tropical storm on the land of the hotel, caused flooding everywhere, and it's the first time anyone ever remembers it. But it sounds like just a normal storm you would have in Sydney, but they just weren't geared up for it at all. Yeah. So very high intensity rain over a 6-hour period.
So just this sort of links in a little bit to Natalie's question as well, in terms of the protection of the land and the woodlands. Once we get the native forest planted out, we will go about putting a covenant on that land to make sure that it's kept as woodland. It's already under a type of covenant, because when the Forestry Service allowed us to get the land back again, part of that agreement is that we forest that using sustainable forestry practices according to the legislation in Northern Ireland. So it can't be just used for anything else but forestry. It's allocated to be forestry land. So that's that part of the property. As to the succession plan for the hotel itself, we haven't got a succession plan for that at the moment. We'll work on that.
Only thing is that I'm not allowed to sell it.
Mick's dad has said that he's not allowed to sell it. So there you go. He's good at giving advice.
Yeah. And what about, Matt's asked, this is an interesting one. When you actually are marketing the hotel and for people to come, do you use the environmental side as part of the marketing?
Yeah, we try to. We could do a lot better in that space, actually. We go through a bit of a transformation with our whole management team there at the moment, and I suppose we're looking to use that sort of element in our marketing a lot more.
I think if we're carbon neutral, it'd be a very big marketing point.
Yeah, that's massive.
We did win. We got a silver award for a sustainable business. So I think it was sustainability for the whole island of Ireland. We submitted our hotel to their awards ceremony recently, and we got the silver award for that. So it is sort of recognised across the island of Ireland as sort of making a setting example, I suppose, in the hotel industry. That wasn't that, but that was for all businesses actually. So the business that won it was electric run water taxi service.
It's great to hear about that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I mean, we might just move on and talk a bit about Abergeldy now, if you're okay with that. But I mean, just before we do, what a fantastic achievement! Congratulations to both of you for just a really inspiring story, and just it's absolutely fabulous. So thanks for sharing that.
It's a nice hobby.
Yeah. I love that. That connection back to your roots as well. How fantastic!
Yeah,
it's really good.
Lovely.
Yeah, and I know obviously for both of you, you know, the environment and sustainability is a big thing in all parts of what you do. So, I mean, just maybe if you could chat a bit about some of the way you've brought sustainability through Abergeldy. I mean, as Carolyn mentioned, it's the locally owned civil construction contractors in Australia, the largest. And I know sustainability has become increasingly central. Maybe do you want to just chat a bit, Mick and Robin, about some of the things you've been doing there?
Yeah, well, we might not be the largest, but we are one of the largest. But these things change daily.
Australian owned.
We are Australian owned.
Australian owned. There's some big contractors out there, but they're not Australian owned.
Yeah. But look, I think on a couple of levels, you know, we're in infrastructure construction, so you can at times be, you know, carrying out work and removing trees and building things. So we very much are trying to do that with minimal impact, and that's been, you know, a focus right the way through. And actually, to tell you the truth, it's been you know, we're mostly in infrastructure construction, and all of our clients
Water.
and mostly water,
Yeah.
but we also do bridges and other things. But so there is, you know, most of our clients are very much focused on minimal impact to the environment. So it's, you know, being good at that is one thing. You know, you know, there's multiple layers to this, but you know, trying to be efficient in what you do and carbon efficient. But the main thing that we're probably focused on a couple of levels is trying to get the energy transition to happen. And on that, we've developed a couple of technologies, one around hydrogen storage, which we're adapting a technology that we developed 20 or 25 years ago for drilling shafts into coal mines. Over the last 8 years, we've repurposed that technology to use as hydrogen storage tanks, underground hydrogen storage tanks. So so that is a big focus of what we're doing, and I think we can halve the price of gaseous hydrogen storage, which is actually quite an inhibitor to using hydrogen at the moment. It's a big part of the actual cost. The trouble we've got in Australia is that there's a bit of talk about hydrogen, but very little hydrogen in Australia at the moment. So we've just established in an office in Denver to pursue putting in hydrogen storage tanks in the US as part of where there's a lot more investment in that. And then I suppose the other area where we're working on that is that I'm the president of the Civil Contractors Federation within Australia. So my focus over the last 5 years has been to galvanize the construction industry around the idea that the energy transition is a good thing on multiple layers. It's good in that and so there's generally a lot of support within the construction industry for the energy transition, and we're working hard with government to see how that can be done. So I think what you'll see over the next few years is probably unexpected partnerships between organisations like the Civil Contractors Federation of Australia and the Australian Conservation Foundation, trying to help government develop plans, workable plans on how the energy transition can happen in the time frame it has to happen and in the locations that it has to happen. So
without, you know, with minimal impact to biodiversity and arable farmland and all those things that people are very concerned about. And I suppose, that being in a position to really speak to the policy makers about having a sensible federal plan for that rollout of the renewable energy to technologies is just so important.
How far advanced do you feel the government is in understanding or having the start of a roadmap?
Oh, I think they're at the start of a roadmap, but it's pretty much just a rough sketch. I actually think what's needed is what I've concluded, having spoken to government a bit over the last year, is that quite a few of us are going to have to, if we can create a broad church of organisations that come together and build a plan, then I think if that plan is delivered to government, that will create an environment that will be easy for them to adopt. That's my current thinking. I think we're going to have to invest in building the outlines of the plan to bring government up to speed. Otherwise, we're just not going to get there in the time frame we need to.
And do you see organisations like, without naming names, CFMEU, are they possible partners?
Yep. I think with the right, I do think we can get, and I think we have to have, it has to be business unions, it has to be environmental groups, and then everybody is going to have to put some money in and hire the best of the best and all put their name to it. Drop the plan on the environment minister's desk with all these signatures on it. And then I think we might have a plan.
Give them a license. And what about, and we'll move on in a minute, but what about, it is a balance, isn't it? That nature and addressing climate, and I suppose social as well, but just sort of keeping it nature and biodiversity and balancing that with what's needed. For example, mining lithium versus, and you're obviously committed to nature and biodiversity as well. So what's your thinking of getting the balance right with addressing climate and the energy transition, but also looking after nature?
Yeah, well, it has to be a balance. My view is, like, we need copper, we need steel. Like, we can't, I don't think people are going to live without energy. Maybe some of us would, but the majority are not heading back. So I think, we do need to have a balance. Some area, there will have to be mining, but when I was driving down to Canberra for the Civil Contractors Federation meeting last week, it's named Kelly from the ACF.
Kelly O'Shaughnessy.
Kelly O'Shaughnessy was on the radio, and there was in the Illawarra, there's quite an outcry against offshore wind, and the ACF had supported the proposal for offshore wind, and so the tone of the interview was, why is a conservation group supporting offshore wind? And she simply said, well, we have to use carbon-free energy sources, but it's got to be done properly. Like, we can't put offshore wind in where we know whales have their migration paths, and we can't anchor it on habitat that marine habitat that's important, but offshore wind will be a part of the solution. So I think it's probably, my view is we just need to have a proper conversation with the people of Australia and just have a plan and say why it's the right plan and modify it if there's, some wrong assumptions in it. But there will have to be some development for it to happen.
And as Matt put in the chat, it's worse for nature if we don't take action on climate.
Oh, it's essential. It's the biggest problem we've got, I think.
I think perhaps the next step too, and this a little bit, is what happens with the EPBC Act, that's being discussed at the moment, and that's sort of coming along. I believe that there's been some closed room discussions going on with various environmental groups trying to nut out what's going to be the best legislation to be introduced. And actually, Stephen, I think it was at that event that you hosted earlier in the year when Tanya Plibersek came along. She had that sort of idea of the traffic light approval system, which I thought was quite sensible. And that's sort of basically saying that if you're in this area, you can green light, it's okay, and amber, and then red, you absolutely cannot develop on this land. And to me, that would apply then to the energy transition as well. So if you're going to build, energy infrastructure, it just can't be in those red zones that are, anyway, that's just.
Was very interesting, going off on a tangent here a bit, but I was at the weekend, I was up in Narrabri, and that's right near the Pilliga. And in Narrabri itself, Santos have basically got their name over everything. All the sports grounds, they've got a store there. Even the lampposts have got, Santos written all over them, and it's amazing. And that's all to do with the gas in the Pilliga. So, it was interesting to see that. But it was good to hear that idea, Mick, about the partnerships. I think that's really, really positive. Maybe just we've got the last few minutes, and you do so much, both of you, but I was keen just to sort of get your thoughts around some of the philanthropy that you've been doing around the environment. And I suppose really just to sort of finish it up, sort of thoughts that you might have for all of us in the group. We can't necessarily all go and buy a hotel, but just thoughts in terms of things that you feel we can practically do from what you've learned, I suppose, with that you might want to share would be really great.
Yeah, sure. So back in 2008, we had a bit of a windfall with our business, and so we ended up allocating some of the funds from that into a philanthropic fund, which is called the Jaramas Foundation. And we've added to that through the years. And the focus of the giving from the Jaramas Foundation is environmental organisations, environmental causes. So we've supported a lot of different organisations through the years and tried to figure out, what's the best angle. And we still to this day support different things, like advocacy is very important to us. So we support, like, for example, the Australian Conservation Foundation, because they seem to have people really in the room in Canberra talking to politicians about policy and that type of thing. And then we also support organisations such as Bush Heritage, which buy the land or help create land covenants on private land to sort of protect sort of areas all over Australia and restore degraded land. So that's sort of like almost two different angles in terms of giving. But the other thing I feel like we've learned through our giving is, there's two things really. One is, I think you work in the networks that you influence in the networks that you can influence in, that you're familiar with. So like Mick's already said, we've got a strong link to the civil contractors. We look at that link and say, okay, well, how can we work within the Civil Contractors Federation to get a climate lens, a nature lens on what they do? And within our business, I suppose we try and talk to our employees about the importance of climate action and the energy transition in terms of infrastructure. And then also we're very lucky in our business that the sort of work that we do, because we do work largely in the water space, that our employees are like making a tangible difference in terms of sustainability for local communities by sort of fixing up sewage treatment systems and putting in pipelines that like fixing. So we do a lot of restoration of old pipelines, and that sewer pipes, really glamorous stuff that no one really thinks about.
Till they don't work.
So that's helpful. That's a helpful conversation with all our employees. And then more recently, it was in the last election, and I think I even talked to a few people in this group. We were involved just in our local community in the last federal election, because we had a moderate Liberal in our seat. And so we were looking at ways to support her, initially to stand up to the government, her own party, to try and advocate for stronger environmental policy. This is before the election. And when that didn't happen, we really pushed for and supported. We didn't have a teal, but we supported the Labor candidate, and she won in our seat. So I'd never actually done that before. That was really grassroots campaigning. So I guess what I learned from that is that there's different tiers of advocacy. Oh, and I suppose, there's one other too, and that is investments. So with the Jaramas Foundation, we've got a corpus, you've got your funds that you have to give a certain percentage of every year, but then you've also got your money sitting in investments. So we've also put a climate and nature lens on what we invest in terms of companies and what that sort of thing. So it's sort of it's multi-leveled. Which
how easy has that been, the climate and nature lens on your investments?
Well, it's
Getting easier.
Yeah, a lot of companies are really being forced to report on their sustainability. That's coming from, the ASX rules. And we've actually we're talking to our investment advisors and just saying, well, we really just want this to happen. And they've actually become quite proactive in it, and they engaged a consultant to look at all of their funds and come up with, again, a bit of a
Scoring system.
or a traffic light for that as well.
So you've had influence there in a way as well.
Sorry, I missed that. What was that?
You've had an influence there as well.
Yes,
I think so, because our investment advisors, they weren't really on that path at all. And you speak to people who've got money in, say, Invest and different specific ethical investment funds. And I suppose we could have gone along that route, but we didn't. We just spoke to our own advisors and said, look, maybe you can be looking at this. And they say it's taken a while, but they're doing that now. I
love the way you've taken lots of sort of mainstream things or kind of normal things in your life and just helped shift them in the right direction.
Yeah, it's evolved. It's been going on for a long time, and I think it's one of those things where if you try something and it works, you get a little buzz from that and think, oh, wow, okay, that made a difference there. Maybe I'll try it here.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? I like your point there, Robin, about just using your networks, the networks you have, and speaking up, and then seeing how people then jump on board as well. It's a nice thing.
And I agree about getting a bit of a buzz. I don't know, there'd probably be quite a few people on the call who, I certainly am a new person to advocacy in getting involved at federal or any elections. I never would have done that in the past. I know there's a number of others on the call who did the same, and you do get a bit of a buzz.
Very good. I think we're almost there on time. So you know, I think, yeah, thank you, Jill. Jill's just put a note saying how inspiring this evening's been. I totally agree. So thank you both very much, both Robin and Mick. It's been an absolutely fabulous session. Everything you're doing is so inspiring, and it's great for us to hear. And thank you for sharing it. And you know, look forward to hearing how things continue to go at Kalivi and all the various other things you're doing. And yeah, thanks for coming and chatting to us. It's been a really fabulous evening. So thank you very much.
Our pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. And everybody else, keep up the good work too.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thanks for being engaged.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And I think we've got one more session left this year. Next month, we've got a couple of things in mind for that. So we'll send some notes around on those in the coming weeks. But thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you all again soon.
See you all in December.
See you soon.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was brilliant. Thanks.
Thank you.